This book, The End of Days, it's the hardest book I've ever written, and it was because of COVID. Most people tell you that they say, "Oh, you're a writer. That's a perfect job for COVID because you can sit in your house and you don't have to go anywhere. That's all you have to do. It's perfect." Well, it was horrible for me because I don't even have a writing desk. I have no place in my house where I go write. I go out to write. I have that bag, it's got a laptop in it, and I get on my bike, pedal to a park, go to a library, go all over. And that's where I go to write. Wherever strikes my fancy, I'll go, and I'll go write. And then we all got locked in. The libraries got closed, parks were closed. I couldn't go anywhere. And so I'm laying on the couch, and my wife's like, "You're the laziest man I've ever seen. Get off that couch and start doing this. Aren't you supposed to be working?" I said, "I am working. This is work." And I just got lethargic, where I was just kind of like, I just don't want to do anything. I just want to lay around. And so, and I always try to travel overseas for book research. If I can get on the ground, I want to get on the ground and see the sights and sounds and things like that. I mean, I'm not stupid. I wrote something about North Korea. I didn't go there. I'm not going to go. I didn't go to Syria, but I figured I'd fake the funk on that because I'd spent enough time in Iraq. But if I can get on the ground, I want to get on the ground. Well, now all travel was canceled. I couldn't fly anywhere. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere. There was a couple of countries I could get into, but then I couldn't. The United States wouldn't let me come home if I made it over there. And so I couldn't do any traveling. Luckily, there's only about 10% of the research I do ends up in any given book. So luckily I had iPhotos that saved all my pictures from all the previous traveling I'd done. And so I started going through it and say, where have you been that didn't end up in the book? For instance, the end of this book is at the grottos at the Lebanese border in Israel. And I've been there. I really wanted to use that in the book, and I never had a chance to. And now I had all the pictures and all the memories and everything, how you get in there and what the security was like and all that. I was like, no, I can finally use it because it fit the book, what I was doing. So I started, going through everywhere I'd been. People ask me if I have help doing research, and I don't. I do all my own research. Some people think that I have some kind of staff, that does the research for me and hands me notes or something. And no, it doesn't work that way. The same thing for social media, and if somebody sends a message to me on Facebook and I respond, I'm like, "Who is this? Your servant or something?" I was like, "No, that's me. I typed that." So, but this time I did have some help doing research. I had my youngest daughter, when I was on book 2, All Necessary Force, a long time ago, at least a decade ago. She said, after I wrote my first book, she said, "Are Pike and Jennifer going to get married?" And I said, I hadn't really thought about it. I'm on book 2. So I'm not sure why. She said, "Well, I know how it's going to happen. They're going to be at the altar. Terrorists are going to break into the church. Jennifer's going to rip off her skirt and start throwing hand grenades and, kill the terrorists." And I said, "Well, I'll take that under advisement. If you ever get married, maybe that's what'll happen." And so, book after book after book, she kept saying, "Oh, they're getting married, they're getting married." And they do in this book, and that scene is in there. It's a daydream, of course, because it can't be realistic, so it's Pike daydreaming. But that scene is in there. And so I told her, now she's in college, that's how long ago it was. I said, "Hey, you finally made the book." She said, "I don't care." She no longer mattered to her. Well, the opening of the book is a pretty, it's an assassination using paraglider. This guy's going to get killed doing a paragliding accident, supposed accident, but he's going to actually murder the guy. And I've never been paragliding, but my wife has. And so I said, "Hey, I need all that video you brought back from Switzerland when you went paragliding." And I didn't care about her waving and seeing the mountains and everything. I want to see 3-ring loop assembly with the guy had on. I want to see where his reserve is. I want to see how he's controlling the chute, the canopy. He's flying around. I want to know where you took off from and where you landed. And so she helped me with that because I could look at the video. I could see on the map. I could pinpoint where the actual falling part was. So I did have a little bit of research help on this one. But the next big thing, because it was hard writing during COVID, was do I even include COVID? I mean, do I put that in the book? You're writing the book, long before it gets released. It just got released in January. And I was like, there's two schools of thought. Some people, I was talking to Mark Greeny about this, he's a friend of mine, and he was like, "I'm never talking about it. I'm just going to pretend like it doesn't exist." And that was right when it first came out. So I was able to punt the last book was American Trader. And I had gone to Taiwan, been all over Taiwan, went to Australia, was run all over Australia for that book, for the book research. And then I got home, and when I got home, that's when it hit. We got locked in. And I was like, well, wow, Now what do I do? Because the problem with writing current events is they're current. I mean, they're happening right now. And so I was like, I'd been to the Shinla Night Market, for instance, in Taipei, and there was 1,000 people in there, just jam-packed with people. And I was picturing my wife doing this with everybody behind her. Well, now that thing's empty. I had a scene, Pike's doing surveillance on the Sydney Harbor right outside the Opera House in Sydney. Now there's nobody walking the streets. If you're going to do a surveillance scene, it'd be the Target and Pike, that's it, because everybody else is locked in their house. And I was like, how am I going to deal with that? So I punted on that one and made it January 2020, which is when the Taiwanese elections were occurring anyway, which is basically what the book was about. So that was easy. Well, now I'm writing this one, I'm like, okay, we're still here. I mean, everybody's still running around with masks, we still can't go anywhere. Do I include COVID? And I was thinking, by next January, is this thing still going to be around? So I started doing research on it. I saw the variants that were coming out of Africa and things like that. And I said, yeah, it's still going to be around. As a matter of fact, my book was released, I was like, what a hell trip. I was just about to start my tour, and they said, Omicron's going to peak January 10th. Oh, that's the day my book comes out. That's perfect. I'll go to every bookstore, and I go, no, we're not doing this anymore. So I decided to put it in there, but it's not a book about COVID. It's just something else the task force has to deal with. They've got to deal with flight schedules. They've got to deal with the weather. They've got to deal with the enemy. Well, now they have to deal with COVID. It's just something they had to deal with. And in some cases, COVID's actually pretty good for a thriller writer, for real-world operations, to be honest with you. I mean, everybody looks like a bank robber. You put a hat on, you put a mask on, and sunglasses, and I don't have to worry about video cameras anymore. I don't have to worry about any kind of surveillance systems. I don't have to worry about cell phones or anything like that, because you're not going to recognize who I am. So that helps me to do certain things. Every time I'm writing a scene, if there's cameras everywhere, I got to figure out, okay, how am I going to do something without these cameras being there? For instance, how did we catch the Boston bombers? Video footage. Went through all the video footage until we found the black hat and white hat, and we put it on the screen, said, who's black hat and who's white hat, to the public, and the public says, well, black hat is a guy goes to this college and blah, blah, blah. It's because they had surveillance footage of it. If they had done the Boston bombing during COVID and they had sunglasses and a mask and a hat on, those pictures would have been worthless. You wouldn't have found anything out about them. So that part was kind of good, but the bad part was America still couldn't go anywhere. We weren't allowed, the only people who were allowed to go into foreign countries, or the EU specifically, were government officials, diplomats, things like that, military personnel. They can get over there, but civilians couldn't. Well, the task force is, by design, a civilian organization with no ties to the United States government because it's a covert operation. So Pike and Jennifer I'm like, if you're going to put in COVID, now what are you going to do? Because they can't get to the EU. And I started doing research on, what are the protocols, and it turned out that Israel had an enormously good vaccination program going on, and they were allowed to go to the EU. And I happen to have a couple Israeli assassins sitting on the shelf I hadn't written about in a while. And so I pulled Aaron and Shoshana off and said, they'll be the lead, and Pike and Jennifer will go over to the EU as Israelis, using passports provided by the Mossad. And so those are the kind of things I mean when I said, how am I going to deal with COVID? It's not like, they're running around, it's a COVID book. It's just things that they have to deal with as they go along. So I had that solved, but then I still, you have to have a plot, which I didn't have. And I was thinking about, what do I want to write about? And there was, in my back pocket, I've had this group forever. I did research for Ring of Fire. I came out of Morocco, and we had a 2-day layover in Rome, because my wife planned a trip, and she wanted to go shopping and didn't tell me about it. So before just flying straight home, we're going to spend 2 days in Rome. And we're doing the usual Grand American Tourist thing, a Segway tour, going to see the Colosseum and stuff like that. And this car with diplomatic plates drove by, and I didn't recognize it, and I said, who's that? And my tour guide said, that guy's the Knights of Malta. I'd never heard of him. I said, who are the Knights of Malta? So he took me to the Magisterial Palace and gave me a little history class on them. And the group is just fascinating. They've been around since the First Crusade. It's a real organization. Been around from the First Crusade. They've gone through multiple entities. They first started out as just a charity organization that did hospital work for people going to Jerusalem during the Crusades. It would help them out. Then they morphed into an army fighting alongside the Knights Templar. Most people have heard of the Knights Templar. They fought alongside them. Then they got kicked out of Jerusalem. They ended up on Malta, became a sea power, actually accredited with stopping the Ottoman Empire from invading Europe because of what they did to sea power. And eventually, Napoleon Bonaparte got sick of them and kicked them out of Malta, and they ended up in Rome. Well, it's a real organization. They have their own passports. They make their own currency. They have their own postage. They have a seat at the United Nations, observer status seat at the United Nations. but they own no terrain. But they're considered by international law to be a sovereign state. And I was like, that is the weirdest organization I've ever heard of, so I'm going to use them in a book one day. And I was doing research for Daughter Wars, as a matter of fact, when I was in Switzerland. And the guide I was with, because I wanted to use him in that book, do you know anything about the Knights of Malta? Are they around here in Switzerland? And she held up her hand, and she had a Maltese cross ring on. She says, we don't talk about that in mixed company. Okay. Now I really want to know what these guys are about. So for this one, the one thing that's working during COVID is Amazon. So I ordered a bunch of books from Amazon and did research on Knights of Malta, saying where they came from, what they're doing now, and that kind of stuff. And the more I read about them, it turns out they've gone back to the roots of charity. Now they do a lot of hospital work, refugee work. They're in all these war-torn countries, in Syria, you name it. They'll be in Ukraine, I guarantee it, helping out with hospital stuff. They're a charity organization, a lay organization, and they do a lot of good work around the world. And there's a lot of conspiracy theories about it. There's all kinds of conspiracy theories that they're doing. Eric Prince is a Knight of Malta and all this kind of stuff, and none of it's true. And so I kind of got to the point where I was like, do you really want to go full Da Vinci Code with this organization? Because one, I don't like propagating conspiracy theories, and two, they do good work, and I don't want to, just give them a black eye just because I need a book to come out because I'm in COVID. So I decided to go. I thought about it long and hard, and I decided, okay, I'm going to go a little bit Iran-Contra on this thing. So during Iran-Contra, you had Oliver North and his merry band of men running around doing all the machinations they were doing, but it didn't mean the United States government was doing all this bad stuff. It's just there's a cell in there that's doing it. And they certainly think they're doing it for the good reason. They're doing it for the right reasons. They fully believe that. And so that's what I decided to do. The Knights of Malta do actually have security elements and things like that because they do go to dangerous places. And I decided, okay, I'll make that security element. They're going to be the bad guys, not going to be the Knights of Malta writ large, but these guys are going to leverage the passports they can get, all the things that Knights of Malta allows them free passage to do. They have diplomatic relations with a host of countries. But believe it or not, they don't have diplomatic relations with Israel, which I thought was odd. But all they do is, in the West Bank, there's a consulate. Lebanon, they've got an embassy. There are all these countries around there they do. But they don't in Israel, which is where they were started. So I thought that was weird. But I digress. So that's what I decided I was going to do. I'm going to use those guys as the bad guys. And while I was doing the research, I was like, okay, what are these guys going to do? I run around, came across a school of thought for Christianity called Dispensationalism, which is a literal interpretation of the Bible. And every Christian, myself included, to a greater or lesser degree, you believe in dispensationalism. I mean, if you don't believe that Jesus Christ rose from the grave 3 days later, then you're not really a Christian. So, but these people take it to extreme where everything in the Bible is literal, and there's prophecies in the Bible that foretell the second coming of Christ. And dispensationalism has been around since the Bible's been written. But in the past, everybody just kind of looked at the signs. I'm going to see what the signs are, and it's going to match the Bible. So like in the Civil War, Battle of Antietam, some people were saying, okay, that's one of the signs of the Bible. World War II, it's the signs from the Bible. And they were making all these things fit the Bible. They wanted to see the signs because the first thing that has to happen for the second coming of Christ is the Jews have to own the Holy Land, and that's just never going to happen. Well, then in 1948, State of Israel comes on the scene. And now they said, holy, that really is in the Bible. That's exactly what they say is going to happen. Except they have to own it from the Jordan River all the way to the Mediterranean. And that hadn't happened. Well, in 1967, Six-Day War happens, they take over Jerusalem. And they were like, okay, now this is it. It's in the Bible. They now own the Temple Mount, Al-Aqsa Mosque, Dome of the Rock. That's where the first two temples were built. It's where the third temple needs to be built for the second coming of Christ. Well, then Israel, because they wanted to remain a state and did it smartly, did not assume control of the Temple Mount. They left it under the Islamic Waqf of Jordan, who had it before, because it's a third most religious site in Islam. It's where Muhammad ascended to heaven outside of Mecca, Medina. That's it, Dome of the Rock. It's a first holy site for Judaism, and it's hugely important for Christianity. And the new Israeli state said, we don't want to mess with this. This is going to cause a huge fight if we take this over. So they left it under the Islamic Waqf. And a lot of people got mad about that. So wait a minute, you're supposed to be taking this over. This is all in the Bible. This is what's supposed to happen. Which is one of the main reasons that evangelicals are so back Israel so much. That's why they want that to happen. This is This is supposed to happen. So for the first time ever, people started, instead of just watching for the signs, they said, look, I'm going to cause this sign. I'm going to make this happen. I'm not going to sit here and wait on it to happen when I can make it happen. For instance, one of the things that has to happen in order for the third temple to be built, you have to be ritually purified. To be ritually purified according to the Bible, you have to have a pure red heifer. It has to be born. You sacrifice a red heifer, then you bathe yourself in its ashes. Now you're ritually purified and you can go build a temple. Well, there hadn't been a red heifer born forever in Israel. There was a cattle rancher in Mississippi, who also was a Pentecostal preacher, who said, hell, you need a red heifer, I'll breed you one. So he's going to make it happen. So he goes to Israel with a bunch of cows and starts breeding red heifers, one after the other, and it's got to be, he's got to have red eyes, red hair, red skin, red everything. And sure enough, they got a red heifer popped out. And everybody was like, holy moly, it's the sign. And a rabbi ordained, the cow's name was Melody, ordained, okay, that is the red heifer. That's it. Well, as red heifer grew up, it has to be a certain age before they sacrifice it. His tail turned white. And it's like, whoop, that's not it. So he kept trying. So there's people who are trying to cause the prophecies to come true. Instead of just waiting on the signs, they're going to make the sign happen. That's what I decided these guys, okay, that's what they're going to do. They fully believe they're doing the right thing. They fully believe it's for the greater good of humanity. But they're going to try to cause the second crusade, following that, the second coming of Christ. So then I said, that's a big plot. Okay, how are you going to get that done? Because they are a Catholic lay organization. How are they going to run around and cause this? Well, there's a group in Iraq. You guys here probably know more about them than the average people I talk to. Kataib Hezbollah is a militia in Iraq. It's a real militia. And they were the ones that the Quds Force from Iran were giving explosive form penetrators early in the war in Iraq that were taking out M1 Abrams tanks and everything else. They're the ones that were doing that. So we were fighting them just like we were fighting Al-Qaeda. They were on the wanted list. They were a Shia organization, obviously, because they're backed by Iran. And we fought them forever. Well, then we left Iraq, and ISIS came in, and they started fighting ISIS. Well, now we started fighting ISIS. So we kind of looked at each other and were like, I'm not going to fight you. If you don't fight me, let's both just fight ISIS. So that's what we did. Well, then ISIS went away, and Kataib Hezbollah returned back to attacking Americans. They're the ones, if you hear anything on the news about American base getting hit with a quadcopter drone or anything like that, it's Kataib Hezbollah that's doing it. They're the ones that killed the 4 contractors that caused us to kill Soleimani. As a matter of fact, when Soleimani was killed, everybody knows his name. He's the Quds Force general from Iran that we killed in a drone strike at Biop at Baghdad International Airport. There was somebody else in that car nobody ever pays any attention to. And he was the leader of Kataib Hezbollah, was in the same vehicle. So when you see somebody in Iraq saying that, we don't want Americans to go and they're protesting outside the green zone, that kind of stuff, it's Kataib Hezbollah doing that, and it's funded by Iran. And they're getting bigger and bigger. When we do strikes inside Syria, we found out early on, so if they hit us and we hit them in Iraq, Iraq gets mad, which I can understand why. It'd be like, if the Saudi Arabian had a jet here and they blew something up in Texas, we'd go, what are you doing? You can't do that. So now for the tit for tat, if they do something to us, we hit them in Syria. They have cells all over Syria. They've got arm stumps in Syria, and we launch and hit them. They're getting bigger and bigger until now Israel thinks they're a threat. They're not to be confused with Hezbollah proper in Lebanon. That's a whole different group. But it's also funded by Iran. But Kataib Hezbollah is getting bigger and bigger. And Iran says, look how good Lebanon worked with Hezbollah. Let's do the same thing with Kataib Hezbollah. We'll start spreading them all over the place. And so that's who I decided to leverage. These guys think that they're working for Iran, but they're actually being leveraged by the bad guys in Knights of Malta, or using them to physically go after or attack everybody. And so then I had, and the lead guy for the Knights of Malta cell he's also a serial killer. So I like reading murder mysteries, and I said, okay, he's a serial killer. He doesn't want to be a serial killer. He doesn't mean to be a serial killer, but he is. So he's killing people militarily. He's also killing people because he's a serial killer. So the Italian police are on to him from one end for these serial killings in Rome, and Pike and Jennifer and Aaron Shoshana are coming from the other end, trying to figure out, okay, what's going on with these murders that are happening, the diplomats are being killed, and they're blaming Kataib Hezbollah because what they're thinking is, we'll get this fight going. Israel will take it to Kataib Hezbollah, which will then go to Iran, we'll have this huge conflagration, and we'll get rid of Islam writ large. But I had so many of these balls in the air. I mean, I had Hezbollah, Kataib Hezbollah, Mossad, the task force, Italian police lieutenant, I was like, this book is going to be my end of days. This is it. I'm never going to finish it. But I eventually did, so I kept working it, and finally got done. And my wife says I have a 12-step writing process, which the first step is, we're doomed. I've got nothing to write. Then I get to about step 6 where I say, I hate this book. It's just horrible. Can't stand it. I don't like it. It has no heart. And before I go on tour, because I'm already writing the next book, I reread my book because I want to remember what I wrote. Sometimes I get confused because I think I'm talking about a book nobody's ever seen before because it's in my backpack. And I read it and I told my wife, she said, what do you think? I said, that's damn good. Can't believe I wrote that. She says, step 12. So that's where I am with End of Days. I think it's a pretty good book.